right, so we'll get going. I don't think I have to speak in Italian because there's nobody here. Monica speaks English perfectly. Otherwise, I would make actually I'll make a quick introduction in Italian for those that might be watching from home. Okay. Buonasera a tutti, se siete collegati a queste presentazioni degli studenti del WPI di questa sera. Questa è la seconda parte, l'altra parte è già online sul nostro canale YouTube e purtroppo le presentazioni sono in inglese, per cui da adesso in poi tutto quello che seguirà sarà in lingua inglese. All right, good evening. Thank you for coming either remotely or in presence at this second part of the presentations of this year's group of WPI students at the Venice Project Center. Yesterday we had the first 4 presentations. These are already available online on our YouTube channel if you want to watch it after the fact. And tonight we have these 3 coming up. But before I do that, again, for a future reference online, I'm going to give a little introduction about ourselves and the Venice Project Center. So first, a quick word about the host of this event tonight, which is Serendipity, which stands for Serenissima Development and Preservation Through Technology. And it's a benefit corporation that I founded together with other people about 4 years ago. And the goal is to essentially repopulate the city by fostering the creation of jobs in the city. And where we are, for those of you who are watching from home, we're inside a former church, which has been restored to be an incubator in 2008. And Serenissima Development and Preservation Through Technology, Serendipity, actually operates this space, which is owned by the City of Venice. And what we do is try to help startups create jobs in the city and therefore repopulate the city. But before it was an incubator, it was a factory actually for 100 years. And what you see here is a piece of the old factory with floors that used to extend all the way into the apses. And as you can see from the picture, the arches of the apses were completely filled by factory floors, and the frescoes were all painted over in white for 100 years. It was called the Herian factory. But before that, of course, it was a church. This depicted here, first time on a map, from 1528. It was founded in the early 1500s and operated as a church until the early 1800s. So what we do as Serendipity here is 3 things, primarily. I'm going to go through all 3 quickly. We do startups, of course, because that's our main goal. We have our own startups, but most importantly, this year we inaugurated the first annual MIT Design X program, which escorted 10 startups on a path towards launching and creating real businesses that create real jobs. And this just ended about a couple of weeks ago. There will be some guests, hopefully tonight, from startups that were part of this program because we offered to support them with WPI teams in the future. So we invited them to come and see what you're capable of. So I'm sure you're going to show our skills to them. The other piece of what we do is culture through a program called Cosmo. And so on weekends and many evenings, as you've experienced, there are music rehearsals, shows, and a lot of cultural events that create this atmosphere of creativity in this space that fosters innovation. And finally, we do research. I'm not going to talk too much about the Smart Desk project because yesterday's teams were pretty much part of that project. You can watch those online. But we have a Smart Desk project is a European Union Horizon 2020 project that we're involved in studying the depopulation of Venice, which is part of our mission. But most importantly, and why we're here tonight, the biggest part of our research is really done by students from WPI that come here every year. WPI, for those of you who don't know, watching from home, is a polytechnic institute that is in Massachusetts, not very far from Boston. It was founded in 1865, so it's a very old university, and 1865 happens to be the year before Venice actually became part of Italy, so it's older than that. Every year, on any given year, there's about 7,000 students attending the university, with about 5,000 of those being undergraduates who are getting up to one of up to 70 degrees that we offer at the university. One of the peculiar and distinguishing factors of the WPI education is the interactive qualifying project, also known as IQP, that every student that goes to WPI has to complete in their third year, and it's a degree requirement, and it's meant to teach students how science and technology can help society, and that's why you're here in Venice, but also, you know, we have students going all over the world. Groups of 4 students spend about 14 weeks on the project, half of that on campus, and then half on site, and about 2,000 hours of work go into every project. To support the fact that this is a mandatory program for all of our students, over the years, WPI created over 50 project sites around the world in over 30 countries, and we send about 24 students per term to these places, and we have to process, let's say, quote unquote, 1,200 students per year, so because that's how many juniors there are on average at WPI. So there's a lot of research projects that we do everywhere in the world. Here in Venice, we started in 1988. If you want to watch the whole story about the Venice Project Center, you can watch yesterday's video, because there's a team dedicated to this that gave a great presentation yesterday. So I won't bog you down with that. Just to say that Venice was the second oldest international center that was created. I created it at WPI, and the first non-English speaking center, where obviously, as you found out, English is not necessarily the first language. Since then, we brought about 800 students here and completed about 250 projects with lots of accolades and a lot of impact, which again, I invite you to watch in yesterday's video from the team that helped plan the 35th anniversary, because next year is our 35th anniversary. We have a website that you can go look at, veniceprojectcenter.org, and this year we also created a bunch of repositories where people can get data and information that they can use for whatever purposes, and we hope that some of this data actually helps some of the startups that are created here in Venice through the serendipity programs. And finally, before I pass it on to the teams, I want to thank everybody who's watching from home or anybody who's here in the audience today. Thank you for being here. And thank the city who owns this place for giving us the opportunity to do this, and the Serendipity staff that successfully are streaming these events from here, and have helped, obviously, all the teams all along since they got here in October. Thank you to all the sponsors and collaborators. Every team more or less work with some external sponsors or collaborators, and those of you who are watching from home, thank you for giving us challenging projects to work on. Finally, thank you to the advisors, not to myself per se, but certainly to my colleague Lorraine Higgins, who's painstakingly gone through every single piece of writing that the teams have done so far, and the quality of what you're going to see is in large part also due to her. And then, of course, thank you, WPI teams, for producing some great results again this year. We'll see the last 3 today, and if you want, you can watch yesterday's presentations online. So thank you guys for being here. It's been a pleasure to work with you. So without further ado, we're gonna turn on the mic to the first team that worked on the creation of a STEM lab here inside this building. So you hear all about that. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Thank you for being here today. We're the STEM team. We're a group of third-year WPI students studying science and engineering. And today we are going to talk about how we implemented a STEM educational lab in Venice. My name is Mike.
I'm Kaylee.
I'm Josh.
And I'm Haley.
So what is STEM? STEM is an acronym for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics, which can be translated to Scienza, Tecnologia, Ingegneria, and Matematica. And why is STEM important?
Thank you for asking, Kaylee. Currently, Italy needs lots of engineers. They have 244,000 right now, but they need 340,000 more. And this graph right now shows you how many available jobs there are in each of these industries. In mechanics, 62%, math, science, computer science, 59%. All of these. Italy needs STEM careers. And STEM projects can inspire students to pursue STEM careers. So a study we looked at project-wise involved giving an independent study project around STEM material to students. And this is their interest in some different STEM topics before and after. They had a much higher interest in pursuing a career in these fields. So we're going to talk a little bit about what inspired us to do STEM. So that's a photo of me, my freshman year in high school, doing the science fair. So I put a thermoelectric generator in a computer to take the heat from the computer and turn it back into electricity. And what would you know, I'm a WPI studying electrical and computer engineering now.
And then that's a picture of me in my 8th grade science class where my teacher inspired me to go in the STEM field by incorporating STEM activities into our everyday lessons. And I went from wanting to be a lawyer to wanting to be an engineer.
So, since introducing STEM at a young age is so important, we made the purpose of our project to create a STEM lab to expose Venetian children to STEM activities to inspire them to pursue a STEM career. And to do so, we designed 15 STEM activities using 2 innovative pieces of technology, the FarmBot and the SimTable. So first, we're going to look at the FarmBot, for which we created 6 STEM activities for.
So the FarmBot is a robotic farming machine that utilizes drag and drop coding through an online web app. You can do this through your computer or even your phone. And here we'll show you a quick clip of exactly what the FarmBot looks like and does. So as you can see, the FarmBot has a tool mount and automatically picks up seeds and plants them for you. All you have to do is select on the web app where you'd like them to be planted. It can also water your plants. You can set up a system of watering a certain amount of time, and as you can see, the plants will grow. The FarmBot can also detect weeds and de-weed and also sow the seeds. So as you can see, this is fully automated. You really don't have to do any manual labor yourself. You simply use the web app. So that's the FarmBot for you.
And then with the FarmBot, we implemented 3 educational aspects into our FarmBot activity menu. So first, looking at plant sciences, where we teach the kids about photosynthesis, plant growth, and water absorption. And then for programming, we teach the students about coordinate systems and drag and drop coding. And lastly, robotics, which we focus on problem solving and collaboration.
So now we're going to look at our second piece of equipment, which was the SimTable, and for that we created 9 STEM activities.
So the SimTable is an interactive 3D sand table, and on top of a projector stand, there's a Mac Mini which is controlling a projector and a camera, and those look at a sand table. And in that sand table is, you have this stand you can morph into different shapes, and the camera can read the elevation of it. So using those 2 together, you can do a lot of cool things. So here's a little video we made of our SimTable. First, you can make a bunch of mounds and scan it, and it can read the topography of it. So the blue points represent the high, or red represents the highest, blue's the lowest. And you can simulate different effects. So right here we're simulating water. So as you can see, when you put water on the higher points, the camera can tell what's higher and the water falls down to the bottom. You can also simulate fire. So here we're using placing fuel sources and anti-fuel sources. So here this is water, so we don't want water to burn there. And we're going to put in timber. So this is where the fire can burn. And if we start a fire, just around the edges, you can see it slowly spread up to the tops of the hills. And then a second thing you can simulate is something called plumes. That's just another name for any sort of moving gas in the air. So here we're going to simulate some smoke. So you can place it down different sources on the map. And then the top left is a little hard to see, but you can adjust the wind in any direction. So when we pull the wind to the right, all of the smoke blows to the right.
And then with the sim table, we also implemented 3 educational topics into our activities. The first being topography, where we teach students about elevation on a map. And then the second being flooding, where we teach students about the impacts of sea level rise and heavy rainfall. And then the last being fire behavior, where we teach students about how wind, fuel, and air density affect the movement of fire.
So now we're going to talk about our project outcomes. The first one was prepared and tested. The second one was developed STEM activities. And the third was observed and finalized our activities. First, we prepared and tested the STEM lab equipment, which was the FarmBot and the sim table. This was what the FarmBot and sim table looked like when we entered the lab. They were not assembled, and then this is what they look like now in the lab, just a few doors down the hall. Second, we developed beginner and intermediate STEM activities for elementary and middle school students using our lab equipment.
And before developing these activities, we thought it was very important to look at how previous STEM programs have been run. So first we looked at educational standards, both in Italy and the US. That's a photo of Massachusetts Science, Technology, and Engineering framework. Then we looked at some STEM programs, some after-school ones. Our Bright Future is actually run in Worcester, and we volunteered at that last term. And we talked to STEM education experts who make STEM curriculum and work with STEM teachers. And with all of that together, we synthesized what we thought were the 6 best practices for carrying out STEM education. Having modern technologies, having personal connection, using the scientific method, active learning, cumulative learning, and project-based work.
So the first practice we want to go over is modern technologies. This practice is very important because technology is what will inspire the students and get them excited to actually go into the workforce of STEM. Here we have our FarmBot, which is a new and innovative technology, and our sim table, both found in the lab. And next we'd like to discuss personal connection, possibly one of the most important practices to implement into our activities. For the FarmBot here, you can see we try to make a connection between cellular respiration in plants and human respiration. And for the sim table, we can actually simulate flooding in Venice so that the students will connect flooding in Venice and those effects to their daily lives.
And then we move into the scientific method, which fosters critical thinking and high engagement. So first, this is an example of one of our lab worksheets for the FarmBot, where we utilize claim evidence reasoning in the form of students will form a hypothesis first, and then they will draw what they observed as evidence, and then they will give a reasoning of why they think that happened, and then make a claim of what they learned. And we also have these worksheets for some sim table activities, and they use the same claim evidence reasoning for those.
Another one that we decided was one of the best practices is active learning, as this requires hands-on learning for the students. So this would mean taking control of the FarmBot, as they can do it from their phone or a computer using the FarmBot web app. And for the sim table, they can actually mound their own landscape in the sand and then learn topography, as the projector can project on that landscape they created.
And then next, we focus on cumulative learning, where activities build upon each other, and then students use their skills gained from previous activities for the next activities. So this is kind of one of our structures for our FarmBot activities, where students learn about sunlight, water, oxygen, which is photosynthesis, and then they learn about how plants need space to survive, and then they move on to put the plants and plant with the FarmBot. And then we also have a similar setup for our sim table activities where students can do an activity without the sim table first, simulating how water flows, and then move into topography, rainfall, and then complete a fire maze.
And finally, project-based learning, which is a very important thing in STEM fields. So to do the FarmBot project-based learning, they will take home a plant that they planted themselves as they fill out a journal on what they did to take care of it, which will resemble what the farming robot is doing in the lab as it takes care of their plants. And for the sim table, students will be put into teams with one of our activities where they engineer a bridge, and this requires them to work together to brainstorm and actually develop a product.
And then, so we created 15 activities at 2 different difficulty levels and organized them in our menu, which you can see there are FarmBot and SimTable activities, and then in both there are beginner and intermediate activities. So beginner and intermediate activities are targeted towards different age groups. Our beginner activities are geared for 5th and 6th graders, while our intermediate activities are geared for 7th and 8th graders.
So we're just going to show you guys an example from SimTable and from FarmBot, just to give an idea of how we do one of these activities. So first we're going to look at Fire Maze on SimTable. So the idea of this activity is to make a little maze on the SimTable and have fire flow through it and teach them about what fire needs to burn. So first, start out by covering the entire SimTable with something that's flammable, and then creating a path with water, which wouldn't burn. Again, these sorts of things, like what would burn, what wouldn't, we wouldn't tell the students. We'd have them figure that out. And if you start the fire at the beginning, so you can see the sim table can tell what burns and what doesn't, and it'll follow the path indicated.
So now we're going to show you an example of a FarmBot activity. This activity we call Tic-Tac-Toe. So Tic-Tac-Toe is an activity. It's a game of X and O's, and it can either be played by 2 students or 2 groups of students. The students will take turns measuring the Cartesian coordinates of where they want to place their seed and execute this action on the FarmBot. So here students place a tomato plant, and now the alternate team or student will place their basil plant. They will alternate until there's a winner, in which there are 3 plants in a row. And in this case, as we see, they go back and forth, and basil wins the activity.
So now we're going to move into our third project outcome, where we observed student interaction with our technology and finalized our activities with STEM experts. We received STEM expert feedback from the expert at the Education Center at WPI.
And then we actually invited 3 students into the lab of 3 different ages, 5, 6, or 5, 8, and 10. And we observed how they responded to the equipment. And we noticed excitement and engagement, smiling and laughter. And unfortunately, we did not observe any boredom in the lab. So what did we learn from the students and the teachers? Well, from the teachers, one thing that they noticed was they could see how to carry out the activities using our teacher guides, but they didn't know what they should expect to see during the experiment, so that's one thing we needed to add. Next, students like visuals, so they recommended we add visuals to the actual activity guides for the students. And finally, we needed to find a way to make sure that all the students are participating, sharing the tools like the laser pointer on the sim table and controlling the robot for the FarmBot.
From the students, we learned that we won't be able to host an entire class around one piece of technology, so we need to create more pre-lab activities that can be completed off of the equipment. We realized that with a wide age gap, students didn't work very well together, so we think that we would need to host students that are the same age or grade. And activities need to be completed quickly in order to maintain the students' attention. They would begin to play in the sand on the sim table if we took too long on one activity.
And some recommendations we had, since we ran out of time to do everything we wanted to do for future teams: test all the activities, all 15, with a full class of students. Working with a small group is not like, you need to have a full class so you can see who goes where, more logistics rather than attention. And then using that feedback to perfect the current activities, creating more activities that are off the equipment, and finally creating advanced activities for someone in high school.
And then so as we mentioned previously, we want to create more activities relating to the equipment but aren't actually performed on the equipment. And what's filled in here, as you can see, are the colored boxes represent the activities that are completed directly with the pieces of equipment, and then the grayed boxes are completed off of the equipment. And we only have a few activities that are completed without the equipment, so we want to include more of those activities. So this is what we mean. This would be our goal ideally. And then going off of that, we also want to create an advanced set, so then our menu would look the same for FarmBot, and then we would have beginner, intermediate, advanced completely with activities on and off the equipment. And then lastly, we want to show you our website where you can find our full STEM lab menu. Okay, so when you go to our Venice Project Center repository, you can go to our activity menu where you see our FarmBot and SimTable activities. And first is our FarmBot beginner activities. And so the first one, color changing flowers, is about water absorption in plants, and then dancing flowers represents how plants need sunlight. Breathing leaves is about respiration in plants, and then lastly, farm plot is about how students are going to plant their plants with the FarmBot. And an example of what one of these might look like when you click on it, you'll see a teacher activity guide, which is a guide on how to help the teacher carry out this activity. And then there are some student activity worksheets that we showed previously, so the student has something to follow along to. And then if you go back to our activity menu, under FarmBot, we also have intermediate activities, so tic-tac-toe, as Mike explained previously, and then we also have a robotics activity where students get to use the technology to directly interact and water plants. And then we also have SimTable activities. So for our beginner SimTable activities, as I mentioned previously in the slides, we have our water flows activity. Then we move into our topography activity, rainfall, fire maze. And again, for these, an example, we have the teacher activity guide and then the student activity worksheet. And lastly, for SimTable, our intermediate activities, we have our rainfall, Salute Bridge, Mose simulation, King of the Hill, and Let's Interact with Venice. And that's it. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions?
I do not quite understand perhaps the overall context, but what is the future of this project? And how do you measure success?
So the future that we'd like to see for this project is we're the first group to kind of come in and create the science and technology lab. So there are other groups that are going to be coming in from WPI, and hopefully we want them to be able to develop more activities and then fully be able to run a summer camp program for middle school age students using our activities, and so teachers can bring a full classroom in and run their activities either after school, and then hopefully in some time they'll be able to come and run a full summer camp as well with the activities.
So we're going to use surveys to measure success. We have created a sticker board survey for future STEM teams where students will fill out with stickers explaining how they felt about the activities and what they learned from them.
For older kids, we give them a pre-test and a post-test, just because they're at an age where they can express themselves very well, and we can even give them just a very simple test, like Cartesian coordinates, just give them an X, Y, maybe Z axis, have them pick out a point, just like we did in the FarmBot. And we can also measure success in that way if they're able to do the activities, because we're creating them in line with the Venice standards for education at their age group. Thanks, everyone.
And to be clear, the lab exists, and it's right here in the hallway. So after we celebrate the end of the presentations, you can come and check it out, and they'll be happy to show you how everything works. So next is the team that at the green spaces of Cannareggio. the green team. Thank you, So Young, for being here. The sponsor of this project is here. So thank you for coming in to see their presentation. And thank you, We Are Here Venice.
Hello, everybody. Thank you all for coming today. We are a group of WPI student researchers, and we've been spending our past about 2 months in the city of Venice assessing the condition and availability of the urban green space, in particular in Cannaregio, Venice. We have been working alongside, obviously, the Venice Project Center and the nonprofit group We Are Here Venice, of which our sponsor is here with us today. We Are Here Venice is a nonprofit group that works, among other things, on promoting Venice as a living city and looking at stewardship efforts for looking at these urban green spaces to try and better look after and maintain these very important spaces to our city. I'm Will Babinsack.
I'm Peter Fernholz.
I'm Olivia Garrity.
I'm Justin Winoski. So what is an urban green space? Well, urban green spaces are natural areas, typically like parks, courtyards, private gardens, and decorative street spaces. And to explain what decorative street spaces are, they're typically just small green space areas surrounded by pavement consisting of grass or trees, usually used for decor. And what is the benefit of these spaces? Well, they produce an area for relaxation, recreation activities, and numerous amount of environmental benefits such as reducing the urban heat and carbon reduction, as well as many more environmental impacts. And so far, WPI has inventoried 472 total spaces, starting off in 2017 in Giudecca and last year in Castello. But as you can see, there's a lot of empty space there still. So that brings us to our project, which is to continue the inventorying of green spaces in Cannaregio, Venice, and to help the maintenance, use, and stewardships of the green spaces.
So to achieve this goal, we first pre-mapped 489 green spaces using satellite images, specifically Google My Maps. And we surveyed all of the green spaces that we could access. So we did a systematic direct observation to collect all of our data. We started in the west side of Cannaregio and worked island by island all the way to the east side. And so we found different types of green spaces in terms of their public availability. So for example, some areas are open to the public 24/7. For example, this green space that's located by the train station is open to the public at all times because it doesn't have any gates or anything to close it off. Some areas are available at certain times, so they're mainly limited in their hours of operation. So for example, Parco Savrignon is closed after a certain time, and so the gates are closed to the public. And then we have some areas that need special permission or a ticket for entry. For example, this garden that's associated with the Jewish Museum of Venice is you need a ticket to get into. And finally, there are many spaces that are closed to the public. For example, this one large green space is completely walled up and appears to be under construction, so none of the public can get into it. And we found that 419 out of 489 green spaces are completely closed to the public. Many of these spaces are likely small gardens or private backyards for individuals to use, but nothing available for the public. 23 green spaces are conditionally available, meaning you need a ticket or special permission to enter. And finally, 47 green spaces are mostly or fully available, meaning that they would only be limited by their hours of operation.
And to show all the available green spaces, we highlighted all the best green spaces in Cannaregio, Venice in our booklet here. So contained within that, we took note of things like availability, which consists of the address and the time of operation of these green spaces. We also took note of stuff like handicap accessibility, which is determined by the type of pathways there. So for example, heavy gravel might be really bad for wheelchairs and crutches. So we just took note of what type there was, like if it was paved, light gravel, or made out of dirt, just to help those residents that are in need. We also took note of any vegetation that was there, more specifically plant photos for those that want to enjoy the aroma of flowers when they go to green spaces, tree photos for those that want to stay in the shade and get away from the sun, land condition, specifically the grass of each green space to see if it's barren or dry, just for those that want to have some recreational activity, as well as amenities. We took note of stuff like playgrounds for kids to exert energy and have fun, benches for those that want to sit down, enjoy the scenery, and relax at these spaces, as well as light posts for those that want to go kind of in the afternoon when it starts getting dark. We also took note of any other additional amenities, such as like trash cans, ashtrays, and water fountains for those that it will apply to. And all of this information can be seen on our catalog, which is available through the catalog tab on our website or via the QR code.
And so also on our website, you can find interactive maps of all of the green spaces that we inventoried. So for example, you can click on any of the area photos. This is a picture of Parco Sauvignon. The image expands and you can see other details from Google Maps, since this is done through Google My Maps. And you can click on the image again to further enlarge it. You can also click on any of the green polygons. These are sorted by availability. And so, for example, in Parco Sauvignon, there are gravel walkways, we have direct canal access, 35 benches, and 20 light posts.
So out of the spaces we were able to access, we wanted to look into the condition that these green spaces were in. And the 5 different types of maintenance needs that we wanted to look into were litter, so if there's any trash that was left in a public area. We wanted to look at undergrowth, which is the undergrowing of vegetation in the area. We wanted to look at overgrowth, which is an excess of vegetation. We want to look into any broken amenities that were in these green spaces, such as benches, fences, or water fountains that may not be working. And we want to look at cosmetic needs, so any other aspect of the green space, but that doesn't really impact the functionality of the green space. So looking into these maintenance needs, out of the 66 in total that we were able to get access to, we documented that there were 55 different types, 55 different spaces that had maintenance issues, some of them having multiple maintenance needs within them. So 12 of these green spaces needed cosmetic improvements, and as you see as a picture on the left, we have a visual map of all of the areas in red that were in need of these cosmetic improvements. Some of these being that if there was not enough mulch to cover an area, but we wanted to look less into these types of maintenance needs due to the fact that it is wintertime and maintenance issues such as these wouldn't be as in cycle as other needs. And we also looked into, we saw that 30 spaces needed better landscaping. We combined both undergrowth and overgrowth in this category due to the fact that it is winter again and this is more of a spring and summertime upkeep. So on the top we can see that in this northwestern area there were bunch of barren areas, so that was something to note into the spring or the summertime. Out of the 19 spaces that we saw that had an excessive litter, we really wanted to look into litter because this is an all-around maintenance need. So mostly we were seeing a lot of the maintenance needs for litter on the west side of the Cannaregio area. And going into further with litter, we noted that there were 12 spaces that had litter issues with no trash cans. We thought that this was an issue due to the fact that if there were trash cans in these areas, then maybe these litter problems wouldn't be an issue. We also documented that 4 spaces had predominant cigarette litter, and this could mean that, as the visual on the right, there were a lot of cigarette butts piled up in a specific area in the green space, and we noted these spaces because we also saw that there was no ashtrays in these areas. So we also saw that 15 spaces have amenities that need repairs. Some of these spaces could have multiple amenities, but in total there were 15. And mostly we saw that there were a lot of benches that needed fixing, and we also noticed that there were a lot of fences that needed fixing. So there is a public complaint system for the City of Venice called DME, where you can submit any sort of report that the city has. We then reported any of the broken amenities that we saw, as well as we suggested the ashtrays to those 4 predominant places.
So we also wanted to look at whether or not there's enough green space in Cannaregio for the population. The World Health Organization recommends 9 square meters of urban green space per individual. And so there seems to be enough green space in Cannaregio because we have about 180,000 square meters of green space for a population of about 14,000. So this would give us about 13 square meters of green space per individual. But we want to know whether there's enough available green space in Cannaregio, which there's not. So there's about 32,000 square meters of publicly available green space, and with the population of 14,000, this gives us about 2 square meters of green space per individual. And this deficit gets even worse when considering tourists. So to estimate the tourist population, we simply multiplied the resident population by 2, and so this gives us about 1 square meter of green space per individual for both residents and tourists.
So we know that there's not that much available green space in the city area of Cannaregio. So the question becomes, how usable is that available space? Well, let's define usability. If we look to the World Health Organization, they recommend about 5,000 square meter minimum for the size of a green space for it to be actually useful. The problem with that metric is that in the entire Sicieri, there are only 5 spaces total that meet or exceed that number, and that's including spaces that are more limited and difficult to access or ones that are completely closed off. Parco Chavagnan is the only somewhat accessible area that beats that criteria. So for us to access is something usable in Cannaregio specifically, we need to come up with a bit of a better definition for usability. So we looked at relaxing that 5,000 square meters and giving a 1,000 square meter requirement for something that's still useful, but a bit more within the scope of something that's realistic in the city of Venice, as well as looking at if these spaces have useful amenities. So where are the amenities throughout the city? If a green space fits either of these criterion, we're going to call it useful. Looking at these 2 constraints, we found about 11 areas of greenery throughout the city that could actually provide some use for people to go to and use. But we can go even deeper into figuring out how well these serve the population, because another part of the World Health Organization's recommendation is that green space should be within a 3-minute travel time of where somebody lives or works. So all of these polygons throughout this map show a 3-minute walking distance from each of these green areas, and we can see pretty clearly that the eastern side of Cannaregio is pretty much devoid of accessible, useful green space. So, what can we do about this? Well, we, looking through our data set, have identified some spaces that, if efforts are made to make them more available, could help improve this distribution throughout the city. And we can see that, looking at those 3-minute maps again, we would add and cover basically the rest of the Sicieri with these spaces. Did I bring this? Perfect. So how did we pick some of these spaces? So we mainly looked into the spaces that are conditionally available, spaces that some people can get into, but really for most of the public, it's pretty difficult. Of course, we looked mostly at the ones on the east side of Cannaregio, and we really care about the ones that are larger. And we think that efforts to open these spaces, even if just for certain hours, certain days or seasons, to help make something more available to the people throughout the city, would go a long way in improving the distribution of green space throughout the city. So we're going to step through a few examples of what some of these spaces look like and some of the challenges that we might run into in opening them up. Some of them are schools. So, for example, highlighted here are 2 schools that are in the Cannaregio area, the Foscarini School, which has a green space of about 1,200 square meters, and the Antonio Dieto School, which has a green space of an area of about 3,000 square meters. So there's obvious reasons why these wouldn't be available to the public during school hours, but even if on the weekends or non-school hours or when school's out of session, making these green spaces obviously more available to the people that live in the area, especially people that would have trouble walking or crossing over a bunch of bridges to get to the other side, would go a long way. There are also a lot of green space wrapped up in hotels. The area taken by hotels adds up to at least 8,500 square meters. 2 of the largest ones in the city are the Palazzo dei Dogi and the Casa Cardinal Piazza at 3,000 and 3,300 square meters, respectively. And we can see by the photos that these are pretty nice spaces that would be good for the people on the eastern side to be able to go to. So now, there are obviously private interests that would conflict with making these a bit more accessible to the public, but there's also the public need to have some more green space. So we have to try and balance those needs. So finding ways to make these more accessible in any way, whether it be limited hours or other types of permissions, would involve discussion with the city and with the hotels, but we do think it would be an effort that would be worth looking into. There's also some spaces that we still don't know that much about, but we think would be useful to look into. For example, there's this space located near the old school of Santa Maria that is pretty large and a good location, but we were unable to access it by going there and are still unable to identify exactly its ownership status. So looking further into opening spaces like this would also be very beneficial.
So with these recommendations, we are going to provide those to our sponsor, We Are Here Venice, in hopes of obtaining stewardship organizations that could help open up these spaces, as well as maintain and upkeep these spaces. So in summary, we have created a publicly accessible data set of these green spaces, and specifically for Conregio Venice. We have reported all the maintenance recommendations to the city, and we have identified potential spaces for improving green space availability to the public. So in total, there are now 961 spaces cataloged in Venice, in specifically the Conregio, Castello, and Giudecca area, and we hope that future WPI students will help fill in the remaining gap. Thank you, and are there any questions?
Thank you again for the presentation. It's very useful to know how many green spaces there are in Venice. I have not understood whether you took into account the many, many, many internal courtyards that Venice has and that are privately owned.
So yeah, we have looked at the courtyard. So we specifically looked into the Conregio area. And so some of the courtyards we saw were specifically like the Gardino Mystico, so like a very private area as well. So you're saying like courtyards like hotel?
So like, for example, right here where I'm pointing, this is a courtyard owned by the apartment complexes.
Sorry, I misunderstood your question. But yeah, so all the closed ones we have looked into, we were mostly focusing on the 9 best areas that we thought could be opened up. Of course, if we can open up as many spaces as we could, that would be optimal so that we could provide more green space to the public. We were just looking at 9 specific ones that we deemed the most usable, so in terms of size, usefulness, and the amenities that were provided there. But hopefully, in a perfect world, we wish that every space in Venice would be open up to the public.
Let me answer the question, because I think I got the question. So remember the map at the beginning where you look at the aerial photo and you actually mapped out all the gardens, right? That includes all the private gardens.
Like this
So
map
these are all the gardens, including the private gardens. They just couldn't get into the private gardens, so that we don't know the details of what's inside. We just know they exist. And we have no idea what kind of plants or anything like that about the gardens, those private gardens, afterwards. All right, anybody else? Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you guys. Congratulations. Good job. All right, and last but not least,
What did you say, Justin?
we have the last team that worked on an application for the Mose
I thought she was referring to
gates.
apartment complexes.
So coming up,
Or stuff like
I'd like to thank Luciana Colle from the Commissario Straordinario per il Mose and her colleague who are here tonight to listen to this presentation, because they were the sponsor of this project.
Hi, everyone. Just wanted to say thank you for sticking around for the last presentation of the Venice IKP 2022. This is our project, Giving Mose a Voice. I'm Evans.
I'm Drew.
I'm Dove. And I'm Matt. All right, so before we get into our presentation, I just want to quickly establish the 3 main topics which we will be discussing in the presentation. The first of which has to do with Venice's history with floods. The second of which has to do with our sponsor, the Commissario Straordinario per il Mose. And lastly, the app design which we have designed. So to begin, I just want to quickly talk about the geography of Venice. As we all know, Venice is located within the Venetian lagoon, which is connected to the Adriatic Sea. It is connected by 3 inlets, specifically the Lido, Malamocco, and Chioggia inlets. These inlets are where tides enter the lagoon via the Adriatic Sea. And these 3 inlets have varying widths. The Lido is 1 kilometer, Malamocco is 380 meters, and Chioggia is 550 meters. Now, as I've said, tides are naturally flowing into the lagoon, and of course this is perfectly all right. What becomes dangerous is when winds come into play. When there are Scirocco winds coming in from the southeast, these are when high tides occur. These winds blow water in through the Lido and Malamoca gates, causing a majority of the high tides in Venice. Of course, there are also winds coming in from the north, which are called Bora winds, which mainly flow in through the Chioggia gate. Now, Venice has a long history of flooding. If we go all the way back to 589, we can find the first recorded flood to hit the Venetian lagoon, and all the way up to 2022, Venice is still being flooded. But if we look at 1966, we see the largest flood of all, the Acqua Granda. On November 4th, 1966, it occurred, and the water level reached up to 194 centimeters, causing massive devastation to the city. If we were to look at a map of the city, we can see that about 100% of the streets are being flooded when the water level reaches 194 centimeters. Now, what did Venice do after 1966 when this flood occurred? Well, the first thing they did was initiate the first special law in 1973. The first special law essentially made it so the protection of the Venetian lagoon and the city was a priority, and they would maintain steps to protect it. Now, following this, the Central Mare was developed in 1979, which has the main function of both forecasting tides, but as well as providing warning to the city of Venice. The Central Mare does this through a three-step process where they use tide gauges in front of the inlets to transmit current tide data. They use models to observe and predict tide forecasts. And lastly, if the tide forecast prediction is to a dangerous level, they will basically declare this and activate the warning systems. Now, has flooding changed since 1966? The answer is yes. Flooding has become much more frequent. If we look at a graph showing the floods by decade, then we can see from the 1960s to the 2010s, flooding has doubled in frequency. And while none of these floods are as massive as 1966, still 12% of the city floods at 110 centimeters, so the devastation is still great. Now, just like 1966, the city of Venice has been continuously providing warning systems for the city, led by the Central Mare. The first was in 1968, following 66, which was the initial siren system. In more recent times, in 2008, the siren system had a massive update, which included more sirens, as well as the ability to play patterns, as well as have different tones on the sirens, so that the sirens themselves can essentially tell people what the flood elevation will be. In addition to this, in the mid-2000s, text messages and emails have become available, which will warn people about approaching tides, as well as the level which they would reach.
So meanwhile, while the Central Mare was developing warning signs, Venice was looking for a more permanent solution, something that would bring protection from floodwaters, not just warnings. So what they did was in 1975, the Ministry of Public Works held a competition for a floodgate design. There were 16 entries, 3 are here up on the screen. In the first one, you can see a pendulum-like design that has an arm that swings down with a floodgate on it and swings back up when it's not being used. Second one is another pendulum design with a casing underneath that stows away on the bottom instead of up top. And then the third one on the right is a wall that retracts down into the seabed and up again when it needs to be used. But none of these were actually used. The winning design of the competition was actually called Mose, our project. So the Mose concept was a casing with a floodgate design and a hinge that connected the two. How it works, Mose, when it's not being used, it's filled with water and it sits in its casing flush on the seabed. When it's time for it to be used, or if there's a flood event, compressed air will be pushed into the gate, pushing the water out and making the gate buoyant, so the gate will float up to about 45 degrees. And when it's at its highest, it will block 3 meters of flood water. When it's done being used, it will again be filled with water and sink back into its casing. So now that we have the design picked out, we need someone to build it. So here we come in is the Consorzio Venezia Nuova, established in 1982. Their job was to carry out the Mose design. So it's a national and local construction companies challenged with keeping the lagoon in Venice safe through construction. So from 1988 to about 1992, the experimental module testing began and ended in 1992. Once the design was then confirmed to be working, it was approved in 1992. And then again in 2003, the construction finally began for MOSE. The project itself was costed about 5.5 billion euros. And the location of the project, as we talked about earlier, the three inlets of Venice is where the sea enters the lagoon. So strategically, 78 of these floodgates were placed at each of the inlets. So 78 total barriers divided up into 4 barriers. 2 at Lido, 1 at Malamocco, and 1 at Chioggia. So we're gonna go through each location. So first, the Lido inlet. At Lido, there's 2 barriers, north and south, San Nicolo and Treporti. 21 at the northern one and 20 at the southern one. You can see for Lido is the special case. There's the only one with 2 gates. This is because the width of this channel was too long for one massive gate, so they split it, put an artificial island, as you can see in number 2, and then this is where some MOSE operations are conducted while cutting the distance between the 2 sides. Also, at every inlet, there are navigation locks, as you can see, number 3, which allows boats to pass through when the gates are being used. This takes about 1 hour, and it depends on which ships can pass through depending on the different location. Number 4, also at every inlet are relief docking areas where smaller boats can go during storm events so they can hang up for a while until it's safe to pass through. Finally, again, at every location, as you can see, number 5 is breakwaters. If you don't know what that is, basically when the waves come in, it's an artificially made structure that allows the waves to be broken up, and this makes it easier so that waves break up before they even get to the gates. That's a picture of Lido in real life, if you were wondering. Now for the Malamocco inlet. So there's only 1 barrier here, made up of 19 gates. This is arguably the most important barrier, or inlet, sorry, because this is where cargo ships, oil tankers, and cruise ships all go through. So it's very vital that the navigation lock here is working to get precious cargo through. Again, you can see the breakwater and the navigation lock right here. And then finally, for Chioggia, there's 1 barrier with 18 inlets, being that it's the smallest inlet. Here, it's mostly used by fishermen. The navigation lock here can actually fit 5 fishing boats. It takes about an hour to get in and out at each inlet for boats. Here, since it's only smaller boats like fishermen boats, 5 can fit at a time. And following the start of the construction of MOSE, delays occurred because of the unfortunate 2014 MOSE scandal, where it's estimated up to 200 million euros were embezzled in funds. 35 people were arrested, including the city's mayor, and this led to many delays, and this also led to a new power to be in order, and that power was our sponsor, the Commissario. Sorry. So the Commissario comes in and takes over in 2015 to see the end of the construction of MOSE and its implementation and testing. And while testing did begin in the late 2010s, unfortunately, 2019 was hit by many, many floods. 3 you can see all in 1 week of the top floods ever in Venice. 3 occurred in 1 week. And it was a little frustrating for people in Venice because they saw the gates had been tested, the gates were going up, so why they weren't being used in helping to defend against the flood was confused. People were confused, and they really wanted MOSE to be working. So finally, in October 3rd of 2020, the gates were finally used for the first time officially, which brings us to MOSE's communication system, which was developed shortly after. The main communication system they have is the Safari system, which can be found on the Commissario website. It shows the status of all 4 inlet gates. Also, Mosaic has SMS and email notifications available for the public to subscribe to. I want to go a little bit more into the stoplight system. So what each of them means. Green means that the gate is down, boats can pass through. Yellow means that there's a planned scheduled lift, and flashing red means that the gates are currently lifting, and solid red meaning they are raised. And it is important to note that while we were here working on our project, there was a change made. There's now a countdown timer added when there's a yellow light showing when the event and when the gates will happen. Further showing that this is a developing system. They really, after 2019, it was a rush to get this in place, so it is still developing, which is kind of why we are here for our project.
So where does that leave all of us? What are we going to do with all this information about Mosaic and flooding and all this stuff? What are we going to really do with it? So our sponsor has tasked us with designing an application to communicate all of this data in one nice, easy location. We're going to take information from the CVN and the Central Array, and we're going to combine it all together into an app that makes all the information that anyone would need about Mosaic or flooding or anything like that really easy and accessible to get right at your fingertips. So to figure out what people wanted actually in an app that looks like this, we went around and did interviews with Venetians. We interviewed residents and business owners and found that generally speaking, they all kind of shared the similar opinions. Things like they wanted the information to be visible and accessible. They didn't want to do any mental math based on like the difference where they were from where the tide reading was, things like that. They just wanted the information to be really accessible and all right there, ready to go. And so to figure out what apps we're doing already, because with flooding being such an issue in Venice, you would expect that there were already apps created to deal with it, and there were. But the ones that we had explored kind of didn't really hit every mark that Venetians seemed to want in an app that incorporated flooding and Mosaic and things like that. So we had looked at some other apps to figure out what they did right, and some to see where they had sort of fell short. And that leads us to where our app comes in. So basically, what our app is going to kind of look like is there's going to be 4 main little pages down there at the bottom that you can access via navigation bar. And the ones that are on the home page we think are really important, or maybe are condensed versions of ones that you might find in other places. So at the top over there, you'll find our Mosaic module, which will display information about the current state of the Mosaic gates. Underneath it, you will see a tide module that can give you quick information about the tides in the lagoon and what they're kind of doing, what the predictions are about them. And then at the bottom, there's a quick travel module that you can use to input your destination and your location to find out how flooding may affect your journey towards wherever you're going. And so, like I said earlier, you can access all that down there on the the navigation bar. And we're going to start right at the top with this Mosaic module. So, like the semaphore system that had the stoplights before, if you remember, they had 3 different lights for every single inlet, and that kind of creates that uses up a lot of space. So for an app, we want to keep the clutter down, so we've decided to replace every single individual stoplight that they had with 1 stoplight for each inlet, and they are labeled L, M, and C for Lido, Malamocco, and Chioggia. And they change color based on the current state of the Mosaic gates, just like the semaphore system. And so those colors would be just like the system before, green, yellow, and red, depending on how they're being lifted, what the current state is, green being no activity, yellow being possible or planned activity, and red being currently being lifted or is currently lifted and closed. And so down there underneath the circles, you'll find some useful information about, some more detailed information about the current status of the gates themselves. And then right there down at the bottom, we have a tiny little tide forecasting thing, just so you can see where things are going, where things are headed, and what might possibly happen with Mosaic in the near future. And so if there's no activity at all, we simplified the design even further, so there's even less clutter, to just one little green circle over there that tells you that all the gates are down, everything is A-okay, and that there's nothing to worry about. When there's a more serious event, we decided to put the more serious gates over on the left, so they would read from most serious or most closed in another way to least serious and or least closed. So this one over here that's still not closed is over on the right, and this one that is definitely closed, it is up and gone, you cannot go through, is over there on the left. And so when all the gates are closed, we're going to show them all just like that. And then we have that tide forecasting thing down there at the bottom still, and that brings us over to the next module, our tide module.
For our tide module, right below the Mosaic information, you of course need to know how your area will flood, as Venice will flood no matter what. Mosaic helps out greatly, but there's still much to know about it. First and foremost, you'll be able to find out your current tide level right at the top with the tide module, and you'll be able to put this anywhere for anywhere in the city itself by typing in your current location or pressing the current location button to the right of the search bar itself. From there, you're also able to tell other lagoon peaks as well, so you can get a sense of what Venice is going through as a whole. And a personalized flood line, so you're able to get alerts of when your area is expected to flood. Once more, this is your precise area at your location. When there is any mosaic activity with the gates, specifically when the gates are raised or tuned to be raised, you'll be able to see a split between the tide levels in Venice itself and at sea. That way people are informed of mosaic's full effect as well. And from that takes us to our travel module, the last module of our home screen. You're able to put in your information of where you're starting from and what your destination is for a very speedy, quick travel. You're able to choose then your preference of travel if you want to walk most of the way, use the ACTV, or have your own private boat or private taxi service to use. Once you're selected that, here's an example of the travel module being filled out for a destination. And to get your fast route, just tap start and go ahead. But from there, you could also choose to go into the bottom part of our navigation bar to the travel page for more information. And so on our travel page, this is an example of a trip filled out, taking one person from their destination. And as you can see, there are many colors around the path. Those colors represent different parts of the trip, whether they're bridges, whether parts of the trip has water in them as well. Alongside useful information for the trip, such as how high the tides will be, the meters itself as well, and the tide level right there, and boot recommendations too. From there, the main part of the travel page is the search bar and icons. You're able to use the search bar for all addresses and also boat stops that the ACTV goes to as well. And from there, we can go on to the bottom part of our navigation bar for the weather, as even though you're traveling, you definitely need to know the weather of your trip. Our weather screens are split into two areas, one all dedicated to tides and one dedicated to the climate and what you could expect in your day. On our tide page, you could see the current tide level at your location, alongside if the tide level is going to be going up or not, alongside more detailed tide predictions for the rest of the day, where you have the peaks in centimeters alongside the times as well. From there, the bottom part of the tide page has a 5-day forecast where you'll be able to see much of the information you need for your week regarding tides, the dates for the week, alongside a sidebar to help with the measurements, and useful peaks to quickly glance at it. And once more, like the homepage tide module, there's a distinction between the peaks within Venice and the peaks at the sea. Moving on to the second part of the weather page, where you can figure out, this has our weather for the day itself at the top, alongside an hourly forecast for that day and a visual representation of the weather itself. Below that, there is a forecast for the rest of your week. From there, you'll be able to quickly glance at what weather is going on in each day, alongside how hot or cold each day would be as well. Moving on to our updates, once more going to the navigation bar and clicking on the envelope icon. Our icon, like our tide page and weather page, is split into two areas: updates regarding ACTV and other news about Venice, and a dedicated tab all regarding news to Mosaic itself. The first part of our updates tab is a filter system. This filter system will allow people to quickly glance and choose the news they want to quickly receive, with ACTV delay cancellations, lagoon access referring to how people can enter and leave Venice to the sea, alongside status updates to Mosaic itself. Clicking on it will allow yellow highlights to the screen to show you what updates you've selected. We also included a toggle system for alerts outside the app as well, that way you can choose to be alerted at your own time. From there, this is an example of a list of updates you can expect within the app regarding ACTV cancellations, Mosaic policies, alongside fog and other weather updates as well. Moving to the other tab of our updates page, the Mosaic tab starts off with a number of gates risings and gates risings for the entirety of the year, as many of our people we interviewed wanted to know more Mosaic info clearly and directly. Once more, another toggle system for alerts regarding the Mosaic updates here. And these here represent direct sources of information from the Commissario about Mosaic regarding its maintenance alongside activation as well. And even more sources that people may want to look into regarding Mosaic and its immense amount of calculations, cost, and procedures. From there, you can expect to receive these notifications both in and outside the app, as mentioned before. This is an example of it on the screen. And if you ever need any clarification regarding all this information, look out for these icons on the app. Pressing them will allow an explanation of the module that you can click out and use at any time as well. And there are more services to our app as well. Look for this menu icon to the top left of the pages of the app. It'll provide you information regarding your account, settings, and alerts as well. From there, I'd like to take a moment for everyone to, if they can, scan this QR code. This QR code is a fully functional mock-up of all the screens that you've currently seen. This is our end of our presentation. Thank you so much, and that we truly appreciate everyone being here today.
Domande da parte del rappresentante o commenti anche commenti or comments.
In italiano purtroppo. No, avevamo già visto qualcosa, è molto interessante, l'importante è che le persone abbiano l'immediatezza, come avete detto, della notizia e in più tutte le altre notizie utili sia nel percorso che per quanto riguarda anche il tempo e tutto quello che viene, perché Venezia è una moltitudine di notizie nello stesso tempo, quindi va benissimo così, siamo molto soddisfatti di questo e sicuramente lo sarà anche il commissario al quale riporterò questa presentazione. Forse lo sta vedendo anche in streaming, però non ne sono sicura perché era impegnata in 2 riunioni parallele. Grazie ragazzi, siete stati bravissimi, grazie.
So she said that, this is great because it's simple, it's immediate, and it hits all the right buttons. So congratulations for what you've done. And she will relay all the info to the actual Commissario Architetto Spitz, who might be watching us from streaming. And the video will be on our YouTube channel forever, so you can watch it after today as well, okay? All right, with that, thank you guys. All right.
You're too kind.
So we're gonna go in back for quick celebrations, and thank you everyone from home.